Hi everyone, welcome. Dominic here with CatholicAuthor, and today we're joined by Citlalin and Katy. Welcome, ladies. How are you?
Good. How are you
Hey,
doing?
good.
Good. Good to have you with us. So today we're chatting about the genre challenge for this month. For March is young adult and teen. Now, obviously, those are two. I don't know. They're kind of separate, but we're just smushing them together because we're trying to get through 12 themes in one year, and then with each theme, each sort of genre challenge every month, try to get us to think a little bit about what that genre is all about, and then maybe how, as faith-inspired writers, how we can think about that, and like we were saying earlier, what are the guardrails? What are the missed opportunities, maybe in this genre? So, this is a conversation, a discussion for the Catholic author community. Anybody, of course, you're welcome to join in the challenges on your own, but this is mostly for those who are inside and want to get a sense of, I guess, kind of what we think. Citlalin was a guest on the podcast. So was Katy. Katy's also a up-and-coming mentor with the community. She's got a course on we're working through how to write fiction and tackle the key parts of it. So very briefly, how about we introduce yourselves? I'm the founder of CatholicAuthor. I love writing novels, and I do branding and marketing. Citlalin, what's your Twitter
Um,
handle?
yeah, hi everyone. I'm Citlalin. I'm a fantasy writer, like through and through, and I'm just eager to talk about young adult and teen fiction. So
Cool. Katy?
Yeah, so I'm Katy, and I am a humorist and a writer, mostly young adult fantasy.
Very cool. Katy, you're published with a couple of novels, and Katy has a couple of Citlalin has a couple of stories out there, and then I'm just self-published. So, but we're all passionate about all of this stuff. Okay, so what counts as young adult or teen fiction? I know that one of the things that teens grapple with, this is just my opinion, being a teen at one point, not that long ago, you feel like you're almost an adult. You're like in a middle phase, and it's not really a nice place to be because you can't sit at the kids' table, and the grown-ups don't yet want you, and So, what are some things that teens are grappling with? And maybe let's think about some of our favorite stories. So, like we were saying before, like Star Wars really comes to mind. I don't know, maybe Wheel of Time, or I don't know how much you identify with Frodo, but he's supposed to be like 50 in the novel. So I don't know how that counts, but maybe proportionally he's like a teen hobbit. So any thoughts there on like, what are some of your favorite stories about coming of age, things that teens grapple with? Katy, you want to have a stab?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I absolutely love all of the Narnia books. I'd say would be my absolute favorite in terms of I guess they're more middle school, but I don't know. I kind of think those are ageless books. They are about kids who go on an adventure, who have to grow up and grapple with things like as you mentioned before. You're kind of caught between being a kid and being an adult, and we see them struggle with that in the fact that they were, the Pevensey kids were like kings and queens one minute, and then they were back to being kids one minute, and they have to sort of grow into this vocation. So that would absolutely probably be my favorite series of teen books, I'd say.
And honestly, with the movies, when they went to make them, they really put a lot more thought into that coming of age story with Peter, and then with Edmund, especially as you're getting into like the Dawn Treader, and then Lucy is now becoming a teen, and all of a sudden these just all of a sudden things that weren't interesting anymore are now a whole lot more interesting. Like, Caspian's kind of cute, and how could this work? Before it was just Tumnus is my friend and everybody's friends. They put more thought, I felt, into that aspect of those characters and that character development. See, Darlene, anything jump to mind for you for favorite stories about young adults or teens?
So I actually didn't read much in my teen years. Like, I'll admit I was a Twilight fan, but that's like gone and has gone. So after that, I kind of was put off of reading. except for like some contemporary novels, but I don't really remember them. So it's only been recently that I've gotten into YA fiction, like YA in terms of like teenage characters. And one of my most recent favorites is We Rule the Night. It's a kind of like sci-fi fantasy it's based off of historical events in World War II, I believe, from Russia, like the women pilots in Russia. I don't remember the exact history, but yeah, I just think seeing these teens in this very real world, like they're at war, and they're also fighting against like gender norms, like they want to protect their country and they're looked down on because they're women. So I think that one really stood out to me because, again, these teens are having to do things that even like adults would have a lot of trouble with. So, I mean, stories like that where, you know, the teens have to maneuver in like a dark world and still like they're fighting with like their youthfulness, like their innocence, and like you said, growing into this, like learning to, like, they see how the world works now through like both lenses, like as a kid and as an adult. So
yeah, I think about especially the new Peter Parkers with the new Spider-Man. Like he's so decidedly a younger teen versus the earlier shows. Or Star Wars, obviously quintessential sort of coming of age story. Curious, how would you respond to this? It seems like the battle of a lot of young adult and teen stories is proving themselves. How do I say this? They were children. Now they're recognizing I have a much larger role to fill. I have a greater destiny that I can step into if I can just figure it out. But I don't yet have any of the experience that adults have. But I'm not going to let that hold me back. I'm still going to go on this journey. I'm still going to do this thing. Would you say that the kind of the challenge of young adult or writing a teen story or a young adult story, doesn't matter in a way the genre, it's really all about, it's now your turn or your character's turn to start making those mistakes, to start learning those experiences that turn you into the adult. You can't sort of get around that. It's like that's why they're full of training montages, aren't they? It's like it's secondary school. It's like going to, what was that show? It's like, well, Hogwarts, or Break Bills, or it's all about now it's time to go more deeply, but it's still kind of a safe environment. You're still not completely on the front lines. At least most of the adults are trying to keep you away from it, and all they want to do is run towards it because they don't yet know what it is. Curious what your thoughts are about that. Katie, you want to take a stab at that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting. So that's a very interesting topic. Yes. And I think also one of the key things that, you struggle with as a teenager, right? One of the key transitions you make, which links to what you're saying, Dominic, is the fact that when you're a kid, essentially you view your parents as being perfect. They're almost like God in a way. They can do no wrong. And then once you start to move into adolescence, all of a sudden you realize that your parents are not perfect and they make mistakes. And the result that comes of that is, I think, why a lot of teens are very rebellious. And we see this in Harry Potter and all the young adult media that you can think of. Is the teen is suddenly realizing, wait, my parents don't know everything, therefore they don't know anything, therefore I know everything.
Yeah, well, I have to know everything, right? Or otherwise I'm going to die, or everything will go wrong.
Yeah, and then of course there's, I think, a subconscious resentment there. It's like, I thought you were perfect, and you almost betrayed me by not being perfect. So all of a sudden there's this distrust of authority, and we see that a lot in Harry Potter, for example, which doesn't, it's not helped by the fact that his guardians were abusive raising him. So that makes him distrust authority even more. And he gets in all kinds of mistakes that he wouldn't make if he had just, for example, told his professors. Of course, then the books would be, way shorter too, and you wouldn't be able to sell them, right? But there is that struggle with, I want to know everything and I want to take this on, and the adults in my life think that I can't do it, but I kind of feel resentful and betrayed by adults at the moment, so I'm just going to charge in and do things my way and make horrible mistakes, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any thoughts on that, Citlalin? Anything come to mind?
Yeah, that actually really resonates a lot with me because that's the experience I had. Like I love my parents and they're like the best parents ever. I'm super grateful for them. But yeah, I definitely, as I grew older, I was like, yeah, you're not as perfect as I thought you were. But what's funny is, I actually, the stories I write are actually very focused on like family and actually trying to work together and stuff. Because a lot of YA that I've read, like you said, they're trying to like separate themselves from their parents, or like they don't have parents, they're orphans or stuff. And I really want to try to find some sort of balance where you can also include family in there and they work together. Because like I'm very close with my family, so it was like I really want to see like loving parents who help their teens or like young adults, support them. Maybe they don't always agree and they will argue, but I think there's like room for that too.
I love that so much. And, once we kind of get into the Catholic perspective, I'd love to kind of talk a little bit more about the toxic tropes that are in YA and,
Ooh.
because when I read YA, a lot of times I'm like, there's so much toxicity coming into this that we're kind of teaching kids are normal, like everything from like, manipulative relationships, like love triangles, broken families, things like that, and then how they handle it, right? Because I think you can put anything in the story, but how do you handle that within the story is how we can be different as Catholic authors and make something that's super exciting and positive and ultimately grows our readers and the main character into a healthy person at the end of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Before we dive into that, I want to talk about the kind of the wishful thinking side of a lot of teen writing. So first, how do we say this? Most people who are writing, especially if you're a teen writer, I think a lot of your initial writing is going to be what's called wish fulfillment, or you write an adventure, you're basically writing about yourself going and having all, it's completely me. I wanted to go have fun and explore in Narnia, so I wrote a book where I sort of went to go do that, But as you started to mention, Citlalin, there's one, when you become this young adult, I think for some teens, it can feel like a light switch coming on. Like there's a very distinct day, almost even time, where you realize, oh, I'm not a child anymore. And maybe it's something biological changed, or it's like a moment in, sort of a cultural moment, or a debut, or an event happened, maybe something traumatic, or maybe just a revelation, right? And I think each of us have there's usually that moment where we begin to realize, okay, I'm not a child anymore. Now I have to discover what kind of a person am I? Because I'm no longer, as you said, safely under the aegis of the kindly gods who are my parents. I'm in a way out in the cold, but I'm still in my bedroom, but it's not the same world. So we have to start redefining these. And I'm seeing three sort of thumbnail ideas. One is if you're in a very safe environment, maybe. Sometimes I see teens or writers exploring ideas where they're orphans. Let's say I had no parents, or let's say my character has no parents. He's out in the cold. Everybody hates him. Now, who is he going to be? What's he going to do? Other times, situations could be you have a toxic family system, or a toxic parent or something. And maybe in the story, that parent isn't there, or they're killed off or something, or maybe they're the only one. And so you're using your story to figure out, what do I think if I were to be in somebody else's life, and kind of going through this, and I had a superpower, or I knew a secret, or I was called to do something special, and these were my hangups, what would they be? Or the other one would be, I don't have any of that wonderful stuff, and I want that, and I want to explore and figure out what that would be like. That's where I see a lot of, one, as you get into writing, write what's fun. start to figure yourself out, but especially with this challenge, being about teens and young adult, it is a time for you to start actively thinking about, what am I going through right now? And maybe what am I unconsciously just putting into my characters? What am I making them go through? Because I have questions about that. Or I want to feel a certain way, and I physically can't get on a dragon and win a tournament. So I'm going to make a character do that because I want to feel maybe the power or the confidence, or have the ability to deal with the fact that my world is changing, and I've got to create my own identity, right? My own response to that. Any thoughts on that front?
Yeah, I actually, it's funny because I still felt like a kid, or like a teen, up until like my early 20s. Like even in college, like I was still like, oh, I still felt very safe, very like, oh, I can conquer the world, whatever, things are going to happen for me just as I want them.
Mm-hmm.
This is before like my serious, like I had just started getting into my faith. So, I mean, like the more I delved into like Catholicism, I realized, oh no, like this is like, life is not as easy as I thought it was going to be. And thankfully I had God to like lean on, but I think so a lot of my characters are actually like in their early 20s, because that's when I started feeling that transition from kid to adult. And yeah, like I've said this before in the podcast, but I love short stories because I can really hone in on a certain like character trait or just like time in their life and explore that and think like, oh yeah, what would I do in this situation? Or like I can like put certain feelings that I'm having and being like, let me see like what this character, like let me put this in there without it being me, putting myself in that vulnerable position. And because I love fantasy, I really want to see like have magic and stuff like that. But yeah, I think it's very valuable writing from your own, like putting yourself in the story, because you can also like explore like your own thoughts. And I think that helps you mature too. It helps you come to terms with what you're struggling with also.
Yeah, you're taking a moment to actually think through what's kind of going on. And I think a lot of us don't usually slow down and do that. And I think what writers do, we as writers, is we think through something by writing through it. It's kind of like in that moment where we pull all of our attention into making this word, all of a sudden I didn't know I thought that. Wow, that was in there. That's actually really cool. Or, ooh, I don't want to really share that one out loud. I've got to put a bit more time and effort into, or prayer and thinking into where that needs to go. Yeah. Katie, any thoughts there?
Yeah. So, talking. Here. Sorry, that's fine. There we go. Talking about this from a, especially perspective as a Catholic teen growing up, I struggled so much with both scrupulosity and also with depression, and also feeling like, feeling responsibilities of growing older. So me kind of meeting up, I luckily had a lot of fantastic mentors and a lot of wise people in my life who really helped me through that. So then when I wrote Love, Treachery, and Other Terrors, the main character in that, the fact that he basically gets a coup launched against him and gets betrayed and still thinks it's somehow his fault, that was exactly the kind of thing I was going through as a teen. You could punch me in the face and I'd be like, oh, is your hand okay? I'm sorry, I hurt your hand. So just putting kind of my own psychological struggles into that. But then I took it a step further and I said, well, who do I want to be? Not just who have I become now, but I want to be somebody who trusts God completely, so much that I have the courage to do what I need to do. So that's what I made my character become at the end of the story. And in real life, I hope I'm definitely closer than I was when I was 16, but I still think I have a ways to go. So I took who I really was, and then I took who I wanted to become, and then I made that the main character's character arc.
Yeah. Citlalin, did you have a thought there?
I did, but I lost it, so you can move on.
See if it comes back. Yeah, I think again, that point where you were a child, and what happens when you're a child is you're like a sponge. You're absorbing everything, right? You probably don't even realize what's going on, but you're like watching everything, and you're mimicking and you're copying. I was listening to somebody on YouTube this morning was saying how we don't think we're a certain kind of person and then we go and do those things. It's like we do things and then realize maybe we're doing them and decide, I'm this kind of person. I want to keep doing that because this kind of person does this thing. It's like a feedback loop, chicken egg situation that when did I start being a writer? I don't know when I started being a writer. I was writing and then realized I was, Mm-hmm. So you're a child, you're like absorbing this constantly. You're absorbing messages from your parents, from your guardians, from your friends, people you respect and trust, and so on. You're even absorbing, attitudes, right? You're absorbing ideas. You're absorbing ways of living, right? You're absorbing like whole patterns of how to feel about things and how to do things, and all of that is just like downloading as a child constantly. You're watching movies and you're reading books and so on, and then a moment comes where you develop your psyche and your intelligence and your soul just kind of like evolves to that next level. And for some of us, I remember for me, it was like there was a day, it's like, whoa, how did I never see all this stuff before? And, for some of us, maybe it's a little more gradual or something. And then begins this new phase of our lives, and it's filled with all kinds of new requirements. And there's new things we've got to start doing to level up. Our social groups change and so on. But I think the key point here, and this is what defines this genre, it's, as you're both saying, who am I now? And it's kind of like you wake up one day and you've got this chest at the end of your bed and it's full of stuff. Some of it is awesome. Some of it isn't. And some of it you have no idea what to do with or how stuff fits together. Like there's swords and yarn needles and there's old books and stuff in languages you haven't even learned yet, and it's just everything from your family, your past, your culture, impressions and ideas. It's all in there. And now you got to start getting conscious about it. And I think a lot of us, this is why we love this as a genre, why so many of us read it. And why we did read and write so much about it is a lot of us kind of sleepwalk through life. Like there is so much to pay attention to, school and just stuff and getting into dating and, thinking about college and then taking out the trash and just family things, right? And there's a lot that we have to think about. And so we end up sort of switching off our need to pay attention to all of these thinkings and things that are going on inside. And we just put it we automate it, right? But I think writers have a chance to actually kind of put the brakes on and actually think about, what am I going through? What did I go through if I wasn't actually paying attention at the time? Because I made a whole lot of decisions based on all of this stuff that was going on in me. And now 10 years later, I'm actively thinking about it and realizing maybe I made some bad choices, or wow, I lucked into some really good ones, and let's go and explore that through our characters, through our stories. And I think when you see a character that in a story that you really like, or you've created a character and you really like them, and it's like having a perfume, right? And you want to keep going back and inhaling it. It's like, wow, it's just so nice to be in this particular room. It feels like a safe space. Ask yourself, okay, why? What is it that's got to teach me? Maybe what do I have to learn from that? What is it about me that really likes that, and then maybe really dislikes, this other thing? Curious if any thoughts jump to your mind about that one.
Yeah.
Katie. Okay, Citlalin, go ahead.
Yeah, like that. This is pretty similar to what Katie said earlier, how you write like the person who you are and the person you want to be, or like wanted to be back then. And I think that's one thing I really love about young adult fiction, from the few I've read recently, is that like their growth. Like you see their how should I put it? Like they've made mistakes, but they're willing to like move past that and like learn from them. Like if a character doesn't learn from their mistakes, it kind of like drives me crazy. Because sometimes it reminds me of me. Like sometimes I make the same mistake over and over again, like the same sin. I'm like, man, how do I like get out of this cycle? But when they do learn, and I can see that, like, okay, they're gonna keep this in the future, it gives me hope too. It's like, okay, maybe one day I will also learn, to be a better person, not be so selfish. I can forgive myself for my mistakes when I was a youth, when I really didn't know any better. And like you said, I was absorbing, like, maybe some of the things I was absorbing were not like good influences. So yeah, I mean, that's
Yeah, I think allowing yourself that honesty with your characters. I know a lot of times we create good characters, or we want them to be good, and they end up becoming what's called a Mary Sue. It's like that perfect, straight-laced, everything is nice and neat and orderly, and the only bad thing in the story is the bad guy. And the main character does everything right, and maybe they get emotional about stuff, and tears drip down their cheeks. But that's about it, as opposed to what you just described, Citlalin. You get a little bit of that the experience and the wisdom that comes, to be able to look back and realize, oh, I did all of that because that's what I was going through. That was kind of my ability to think about things or to see. I couldn't really have made another choice because that's the choice I felt was the only one I could make at the time. And I think as writers, especially if you are currently a teen, use writing to kind of, she'll be back in a moment. Use writing to kind of process that. Welcome back. And if you're older and you're writing teen stuff, allow your teen character, young adult character, to be where they need to be and to make those mistakes, to jump to conclusions, to be hasty and headstrong and just like, emotions are everywhere and just the world needs me. Heck, I need me to be whatever. Katie, any thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. This is so important to writing good fiction, is let the characters, hero, villain, let them be human. I think the reason, we get a lot of, for example, a lot of like the Christian movies and stuff that come out, and they're just so cheesy, right? The Christians like do everything perfectly, and then, the like atheist or whatever is like twirling his mustache and like being evil or whatever. It's like those are not human characters, right? First of all, you need to understand exactly why the villain is doing whatever they're doing, and you need the hero to make good choices, but they don't always have to make the good choices, and you as the author don't necessarily have to say whether they're making a good or bad choice either. You can kind of let the reader think about it and figure it out. I always go back to scripture when I think about that. The patriarchs, they're biblical heroes, right? But they do all kinds of things that are not heroic, and usually that's shown in the consequences of what they do. The Bible rarely comes out and says, they did this and that was bad. Usually it becomes obvious eventually in the story, but just let your characters be real. Let them behave like real people do and be a mix of good and evil, and that's what will make your story real.
I want to ask you, let's turn over to this in just a second about toxic tropes in teen and YA. It's going to be fun. But a thought I wanted to share on that front was, in allowing them to be human, I found this great little nugget of wisdom in between your good character and your bad character. The key thing to remember is that they are, in most cases, they are the same character, from a writing standpoint. As a writer, when you think about your bad guy and your good guy, especially if you're trying to make them human, recognize they are basically the same character, but one responds badly and one tries to respond half as badly. Well, if your good character responds good every single time, you've probably got a boring story. Think of how many times Luke Skywalker, right, fell or failed or didn't make it. Or Anakin. I mean, the whole point of the Star Wars story is about Anakin and the huge journey that he went through. So think about when you're creating your characters, you're putting both your good guy and your bad guy through increasingly harder and more demanding and difficult situations. But the only difference is one takes all of that, the things that are happening and turns it into anger and negative energy and internalizes it, turns it on themselves, lashes out at everybody else maybe, or tries to project out what's going on inside them on everyone else. Whereas the good one is learning the capacity to let go of what's happening, to grow in resilience, to adapt. Mm-hmm. Right. So in that moment, I think that's why a lot of young adult is it's either deeply relational stories or they're deeply adventurous stories, because it's, I'm defining my identity at this point and trying to figure out who I'm going to be like for the rest of my life. I want to like myself. So how you're kind of like dialing up the extremes and the contrast, what would I do if I found myself in these adventurous or extreme situations? What would that tell me about myself? And am I going to like what happens such that I'll stick around for the rest of the journey? And if I don't, well, then what do I need to do? Right. So let's talk about the toxic tropes, and then let's reflect on, what is it as Catholic authors we should be bearing in mind, without going over and being preachy, like you just mentioned, and end up being boring. But then actually having an actual contribution to make. So let's talk about toxic tropes. What you got, Katie?
Oh, man. So the first one I will say is just how romance and relationships are handled in general. And I don't just mean in terms of like sexuality, because that's probably where most people are going to think like, oh yeah, the teens are all like having sex, but that topic is beaten to death. What I'm talking about is specifically the fact that in YA romances, and I'm thinking Twilight, haven't read the books, have seen the movies though, so I'm basing this on the movies. There's this series, the Maze Runner series. The relationships, the romantic relationships in these stories are full of manipulation, are full of like playing with people's emotions, making each other jealous. And they also lack a lot of the depth and the friendship that comes with a healthy romantic relationship. So they tend to be, very sensual. So the couple will be sitting there staring eye to eye, and they'll be like, Maze Runner series had a line that said, she smelled like sweat and flowers, and I just started cracking up. I'm like, well, that's what girls smell like. Where are you getting this? But right, it's all about like feeling and smell and like all that hormonal stuff. And I'm like, there's no friendship here. There's no appreciation for the other. Like, what do you guys do that's not like staring at each other? Do you read books together? Where is that coming from? I mean, yeah, I think like, a kiss can be super romantic, or there's definitely plenty of chaste, sensual stuff that you can do that doesn't go over the line, but where is the spiritual connection? Where's the connection of friendship? Where are two people working together to accomplish a goal that's bigger than them, and then overcoming that, or accomplishing that goal together, and then falling in love in the process, right?
Mm-hmm. That would be I think why you're bringing this up as a toxic trope is because most relationships start there and then kind of stay there, and then the book or the author is like saying, this is it. It doesn't get any deeper, it doesn't get any better, this is where it stays. And mm-hmm. It's true that is a normal, until you, how do I say this? Sometimes until you've experienced being manipulated or doing a couple of dumb things or having your heart broken a couple of times, you don't actually learn, oh, I shouldn't actually be doing that. Or, whoops, I was sleepwalking and letting my feelings drive this thing. Mm-hmm. The whole point of why that is toxic is because the characters don't actually learn. They don't mature and actually respect and revere the other. They both, they're all like completely focused on each other as opposed to together helping each other meet some kind of a goal. Now, obviously, if we're talking about an actual romance story, that's kind of even harder, even like a sadder situation where it doesn't get, it's like there's a ceiling of just hormones that doesn't get broken through. Like you can't build a life on that, Any thoughts there, Citlalin, on what Katie was saying?
Yeah, I mean, I did read Twilight, so like yeah, all that and the thing is like when you're a teen who's never experienced any of this stuff, like you believe it. So it's toxic because it's actually like changing how teens view romance, how they're supposed to view romance. And they, at least for me, for a while, I searched for like I looked for certain characteristics that I read in the books that portrayed these toxic relationships. And so there's, yeah, like honestly, my favorite, like once you grow up and you learn like this is not healthy and this is not, this doesn't actually make me happy. You know, I started reading other romance, like healthier romance stuff, and like my favorite ones are actually now like Pride and Prejudice is one of my favorites. It's like super funny, you know, it the hate to love relationship I don't think is very toxic in the way that others are, because they actually grow. Like Katie said, they are actually helping each other become better people by the end. Like they show each other, like they're honest with each other, and they're like, you like are not, you're not as great as you think you are, or you're not as like pure as you think you are, like, or righteous as you think you are. And so yeah, I mean, yeah, that's it.
No, I think it's a great observation. Katie, what else you got?
Yeah, so in terms of toxic tropes, so we talked about romance. Specifically, subtrope is the love triangle. Now, it's a running joke in my writers group how much I disdain love triangles. I just absolutely hate them to probably a ridiculous extent. Because in all reality, I don't think there's anything wrong with having one. But, like, for example, in Twilight, right, Bella is constantly manipulating Jacob so that she can use him, but then she'll like run off and like want to be all romantic with Edward, and then she'll like act all conflicted, and I'm just like, and she never, I mean, sort of goes beyond it, but kind of in a half-hearted way, I guess. So love triangles specifically, even though we talked about romance, I bring those up because they are in every single YA story I have ever read. And every time I read one, I want to throw the book across the room. I'm like, woman, there is a war going on. Why are you trying to like manipulate these men? You don't have to like pick a husband right now.
So what's a good way of handling that then? Let's say you do incorporate a love triangle. Like I'm thinking, my wife and I are rewatching Smallville, right? We're like season 6 or 7. So Lana can't decide who she's going after, if it's Lex or if it's Clark or if it's, I don't know, any jock with a blonde head of hair. You know, so how do you handle, what's a good way to handle a love triangle? Because I think it does serve a good purpose. It's like it's meant to test you. You know, are you sure you want to make this decision for this one, you know, unique relationship? Problem is when it never gets out of that testing phase, and you like not having to choose.
Yeah, or you like being able to use both, you know, men as in Twilight, right? Mm-hmm. You don't want to get rid of them both because they're both kind of handy to have around. Yeah, so I would say the way I would say to handle a love triangle in real life, and admittedly I've never been in one, so the way I would say is just don't make a decision right now, but don't pursue any romance with either of them. I would say, you know, take some time to step back and don't go into anything more than a friendship. And if there's like a temptation for you to lead one of the two people on, you know, make sure you're going out like with a group of friends and not being with them one-on-one, and just do that until you kind of figure yourself out, or until one of those relationships turns into a really deep, meaningful friendship. And then you're willing to make a decision there, but don't try to pursue both relationships at one time, and don't tease and lead on both people. Mm-hmm. So I'd say probably something like that would have to happen in the book.
Yeah.
And if you want to subvert the trope, you can also have your main character just be single. They decide, never mind, I'm good. Just be single. It's fine.
Exactly.
What is the is it called the Bechdel test? It's where two women walk into a bar and never talk about guys.
I think so. Something like that. Yeah.
So that's like held up as, if you have two women characters in the story, are they there purely for themselves and not to be somebody else's, love interest? So here's something I'm thinking, actually, looking back at some of my own stories, some of the horrors that I wrote, the stuff that I was working through and stuff I'd never want to share. I kind of think that one, when you're writing stuff, there's some things you're comfortable, you want to share and so on, but then there's probably a bunch that you don't. I think it's important not to take your writing too seriously, because it's what you're doing is you're like, how do I say this? It's like you've got a box of Lego bricks and you want to build stuff with that Lego bricks. But the point is you can only build with what's in the box. And if you only have red bricks, you're never going to be able to make a tree that actually looks like a tree. You'll do something that has the shape and the function, but it won't be accurate, because you haven't yet lived long enough or experienced those things yourself to kind of add more to that chest. So there's that great line that says, write what you know. Now, it doesn't mean, like Katie, I think you and I were chatting about this. If you've never ridden a dragon, that means you can never write about riding a dragon. And it's like, no. You know what it's like to ride a bike and to have a pet, so you can start to combine those things together. But if you've never been through, for example, a healthy relationship, you may not want to try to seriously write about characters going through that. You could do a character going through what you went through and maybe learning what you learned, right? Because then it's going to be real, then it's going to make sense, and you're going to kind of know what you're talking about. But I think an advice I would give myself as a teen is, don't write romance relationships, especially if you're like a younger teen. You're still figuring out everything happens. You'd have no idea yet where your identity boundary is, and it takes sometimes years and plenty of friendships to start to figure out, who you are and who you're comfortable with. So focus on identity stories, focus on adventure stories, focus on friendship stories, stories where boys and girls and different teens become friends with each other and do things together and form teams and fellowships. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was also going to say, you can write about family relationships too. I love, I'm the youngest of 5, and my siblings and I are super close. So I love sibling stories. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's a story I've written yet where the main character doesn't have a sibling that is either referenced, or they travel, they have their adventure with together, or, obviously siblings, we argue and stuff, but going back to the toxic tropes, there were a few YA stories that I've heard of. I don't think I've read any yet, but there are a few where the sibling relationship is kind of toxic, I've heard, especially in fantasy, in between sisters. There's a lot of that rivalry, which is, I've never felt that way with my siblings, so I was I don't know if I would have even been able to relate if I had read them, but there can be rivalry, but I hope, especially as Catholic writers, you can show the beauty of family relationships and specifically sibling relationships, which I think there are very few that I've read that I love. So
yeah.
Any follow-ups there, Katie?
Yeah, this is relating, but and we talked about it a little bit, but either weak parents or absentee parents, which again, these things are not, this is not set in stone. There are some fantastic stories that have these tropes, but when it's all you ever see, that can be a problem, and I think a lot of times, especially in fantasy stories, right? You have the kid who experiences something amazing. They tell their parents, and the parents are like, "Oh, that's just your imagination," no respect or anything. And I remember seeing this trope forever. And then one day I watched My Neighbor Totoro, Miyazaki film, and the kids tell their dad that they have seen these creatures, and the dad's like, "Okay, here's what we do about it." And I was like, this is amazing. I love this. And you see this really healthy family dynamic, in that movie, and it doesn't make it any less interesting. It makes it more interesting, right? They're all working together, and the dad is helping them kind of figure out these magical things that are happening around them. And I'm like, we need more of this, right? We don't have enough of it.
Yep. I think two movies that also stand out, like what you said there, Citlalin, about family, and what you just said, Katie. What is it called? A Silent Place, or
Quiet
Encanto.
Place, I think.
Sorry, Quiet Place. Thank you. Quiet Place or Encanto. What's cool about them is there's no relationships, technically speaking, central to those stories. What I loved about Encanto was the relationship of the family. I mean, there's kind of an adventure going on in there, but it really is about siblings learning more about each other, prodding and prompting and pushing each other to go to be a little more deep, to actually open up about what they're struggling with within their family situation, cultural situation. Or like A Quiet Place, or Stranger Things even. There's sort of a little bit of trying to have a relationship in Stranger Things, but they know they're still kids, and the whole focus is more on how are we as friends responding to this great big threat. So again, just thinking back on some of the stories where I tried to be a grown up and write about grown up stuff, and if I go back and reread it now, I just cringe, and it's like, because you weren't old enough, you didn't know what you were dealing with, and all you could see were like the outsides of what those things could look like or maybe feel like. So as a teen, or where you are in your life, think about where you are and just realize that's okay, and write about how you got there, and try to make your characters do that too. And if something isn't going to feel believable, just don't include it. So do you have a last one for us, Katie? And then we can talk about, is there a way that our faith can inspire us?
Let's see. Toxic young adult. So I think we've been through all of the main ones. Citlalin, do you have any other that just like jumped to mind?
No, the family one was usually the one that really
Yeah, family distrusting of adults.
What about toxic, what do you call it? Like toxic bravery, or like the kind of the macho things. Like you see this with, I think, a lot of, being the guy in the room. So you got guy-based stories or hero-based stories, and there's like toxic heroism, like, I am called to do this and that. I think I haven't read the Percy Jackson books, so I can't speak to that. But like the movie or whatever, there comes a point where the hero kind of feels like it's okay for me to run over everybody and to lie and to do anything I need to do because, well, this mission is massive and I have to solve it, And what do you mean take out the trash? I'm too noble for that. Heroes don't take out the garbage. Heroes don't do normal stuff and wash laundry and so on. Now, that's an okay thing to include in your story. Every hero has to go through that phase. Heck, I have to go through that phase. I hate garbage. But it's when the story stays there and the story kind of tells you, if you've got some real serious to do, it's okay to manipulate your way through relationships, to constantly lie and to do terrible things or whatever, because, well, again, the ends justify the means. Your great mission and goal will allow you to forgive everything that's happened. Katie, any thoughts there?
Yeah, so this becomes a really common trope, and it also there's a trope that kind of goes with it, I've seen, which is if the character in question has been through something horrible in their life, they kind of almost feel justified doing whatever it is that they need to do because they're the chosen one, they're special, and also they've been like abused or whatever. So that means they're just really unlikable, right? Beginning, middle, and end. And I have not read Ready Player One, but my husband was just complaining to me about this reading it. He says in the beginning, the character is really unlikable. In the end, he like takes over this video game franchise and he's like, well, we're going to have it be for everyone. So it's not this big corporation controlling everything. Beginning of the second book, he's running a big corporation that's controlling everything, except he feels justified in doing it because, well, it's him now. So he's the chosen one, so he can do it. So yes, I agree with you that that's a trope. And I agree with you that, we could do a whole podcast on harmful stereotypes for men and for women as well in all kinds of media. But yeah, I feel like, we see this trope a lot specifically with male heroes. And I think a lot of young men need to know it's okay. Like, being a dad, being a good friend, being a hard worker, taking out the trash, like those are heroic things that young men need to do. And that will make you just as heroic as, punching a bad guy in the face. Like,
Any thoughts there, Citlalin?
Yeah, actually, like on the other side, like the coin, for female characters, there was I think it's kind of going away, but there was a time where, like, to be considered like a strong female, you had to kind of get rid of your femininity and like be like tough and
carry a machine gun and a
like
halter top, and
yeah. And so that's kind of like for women on that side, they couldn't like show weakness or vulnerability, where it's like, this is, I love seeing vulnerable characters, like men and women, like seeing them open up to people, especially like when they're not very trusting, showing that growth, like that just shows you how close they are with the other characters when they're finally able to open up and share, sometimes their darkest secrets because they feel comfortable. And I think that's just a great moment in fiction. So.
I think part of I think we've grown out of this, but we have it in a lot of movies and a lot of stories where the noble hero, whatever, it's basically him. Maybe he's got a sidekick, but there's only one person, and there's only one person he's thinking about, him. And he, if he can just be strong enough, he can save the day, or he can outwit the bad guy, or he can muscle through it. And we all know that's not realistic. I mean, that's not even practical. It's just, that's a narcissistic kind of dream. Everybody loves the idea of, I've got it in me to, be the hero on my own, but nobody is a hero on their own. And I think that's why we see a lot more teams and fellowships and leagues and, Avengers, together there is so much more that is possible. And it's also so much more humble. And also it's a whole lot more fun to write, to have a group of 3. And I think that's a fantastic, point for writing any story. Never have one character. Always have a friend, have a little talking chipmunk. You need something that gets the character out of their head, so they're not thinking through their chapters all the time, but they're actually talking their thoughts out loud, or arguing with them with somebody else. Always have multiple characters, and then don't make it, it's what's so beautiful about Frodo and Sam. They get to the end, they get to Mount Doom, and Frodo ends up being completely overwhelmed. And he was meant to, that's why Tolkien created that character, was to show no human could ever, on their own steam, bear up under that much evil and that much, pressure. But Sam got him there. They were there together, and Sam could be seen as the hero of Lord of the Rings. Aragorn is not a lone hero. He's surrounded himself with all kinds of people to help him, because he knows that he has the same weakness, runs through his veins and stuff. Yeah. So wrapping up here in our last kind of just couple of minutes, what's a thought that our faith can bring to this? And in a way, we've been doing this whole time. But what's a sort of an ending thought that our faith can bring to prompt us to take this seriously and to enjoy the journey and write compelling stories, but are actually going to be good for us and good for others too? Katy, any thoughts there?
I'd say let God's grace work through you and show it working through the characters as well. They don't just magically become heroes. They don't just magically make the right decisions. In fact, a lot of times they're going to screw up. But if you show God's grace working through those characters and working in your plot, if the hand of God is in your plot, you can show how God transforms these characters over the course of the story. And despite all their flaws, they end up coming out okay. And know that that's how God's going to work through you as well.
Yeah, I pretty much the same thing. Don't be afraid of writing maybe like dark things, but don't leave it there. I mean, one of the beats of one of the famous story beats is Dark Night of the Soul. Really grasp onto that, but know that there is hope. There's light after that. And like Katy said, put God first in you don't have to put God in your story, but show God's light somehow.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly the point. That's what we've been kind of doing this whole conversation is, what is grace, right? Grace is it's the inner prompting, it's the indwelling of God in you and God in your characters and in other people around you and so on. Pardon my corgi if you hear him. But as you're wrestling with your characters, recognizing that, oh, this isn't a good place or this isn't a good thing, right? That little ability to be aware of that can be grace. So work with that, right through that, think about that, and make your characters earn the ending, right? You can't just have a character waltz up and sort of earn the medal, get the medal. They have to actually work for it. And that's the lesson for this part of being human, this phase in your life. You now have to learn how to earn your ending. Now, as you get older, you have to sort of unlearn that and learn how to rest in God. But that's another later lesson. For this part of our life, we actually really do have to win the tournament and learn how to be the best and show up for your friends and, set the elements down in your life, and excel at them and learn how to be resilient and to carry responsibility and to make hard decisions, for the good of others and for yourself. Those are all incredibly important lessons that if you're a teen watching this, that you're working through right now. These are lessons that if you can be attentive and learn them consciously now, one, you've just hacked your life and it's going to get easier faster. I mean, that's possible, one. But two, your characters are going to be so much more interesting and people read them and think, how did you just wrote what was in my head? Because most people don't have the time or don't feel like they can slow down and think. And that's kind of what writers do. Is we do slow down and we do think. And that's why writing can be like a vocation. It can be something that you do that helps you get better, that helps you be more intentional, more attentive to how life works, to how God works. And again, God doesn't work with stars in the sky and like burning skies and crosses and all the time. Often he works through your interests, through people around you, through moments, through coincidences, and of course, most of us have, no idea about all that because we don't need, all that's boring. I don't have to pay attention to that stuff, right? So take the time to be attentive. Take the time to think about what you're going through. Think about what you went through. If you're older and you wrote stories when you were a teen, it's actually kind of fun to go back and read through that and realize, oh, that's what I was thinking at that time. And that can be a really good sort of treasure chest of like realizations to help you create, good characters or believable characters. I think the other thing is also read, watch movies, engage with people, chat with people, watch them. And don't stalk them and don't be that weird guy, sitting in the coffee shop stalking people. But actually pay attention to other people, like really forget about yourself for a minute and completely throw yourself into paying attention about the other person, right? That's what you're doing as a writer with your character anyway, is you're learning to get comfortable thinking about respecting, revering the individuality, the identity, and how God is working in another person, another human being. Alrighty. This was a cool chat. I think we covered some cool stuff today. Thank you both, Katy and Citlalin, for coming on. If you're writing a story for this month's genre challenge, go ahead, post it in the community. It is all for just peer feedback, friends sharing feedback. It's just a challenge. There's no mentors judging it or anything. It's just for having fun. Given that it's YA or teen, it can be any genre. And if some really are written well, you're showing some talent, people are also really enjoying them, then they can also qualify for honorable mention on the journal website, which we just launched as of this episode, and also in our printable journal, which comes out once a quarter. So you can also get published in there. So keep writing, keep reading, and say one Hail Mary a day for, to grow in your own journey. Thanks again, everyone.